Time once again for another edition of the Curtain Call podcast. My name is Michael Beck, your deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Joined with my co-host, as always, one Mr. Geoffrey Benedict. Geoffrey, how you doing tonight, sir?
Doing great, Michael. Doing great.
Love it. And as always, through our off-season series here, breaking down draft prospects from across all the big schools as we venture into the off-season, we have a special guest helping us break down the Georgia Bulldogs, Mr. Connor Riley. Connor, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing pretty well.
Awesome. It is our pleasure to have you on, to say the least. I think the most interesting name that I think everyone wants to talk about right now is Jordan Davis. Putting on a show at the Combine, setting a record for broad jump amongst 300-pounders, which is insanity, running a 40-yard dash faster than half the quarterbacks in the NFL ran it. Just an athletic specimen. I think he topped the scales at over 340 pounds. Just insane what he was able to do at the Combine, and of course, being a leader on that Bulldogs defense. Can you break down his game and whether or not his athleticism is going to be something that kind of pushes him into that kind of all-pro stratosphere potentially in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I taking you behind the curtain here a little bit. I had a pre-write ready to go that he was going to run a sub 540. I was not surprised by the sort of speed there and the get off that he has. I think the big thing, you touch on his weight there, him weighing in at 340. He didn't play at that weight at Georgia. He was much closer to 350, at sometimes even pushing past 360. I think a big thing for him in the NFL going forward is how he manages his weight. That was sort of a consistent, point of discussion about him at Georgia. And granted, he didn't play, a ton of snaps. I don't think he ever logged more than, say, 40% of snaps in a game this past season. A lot of that had to do with how dominant he was in allowing Georgia to get out to big leads. But I think his NFL future is really going to come down to, if he's able to stay consistently at 340 pounds, allow himself to be on the field, first and second down. We'll see if he ever fully develops into a third down player. But he does show some flashes as a pass rusher to where, maybe not an every down player, but a guy who can be impactful when he is asked to do that. Along with, just bar none, he was the best run defender in college football. He was an immovable object. And I expect that to transfer to the NFL level. It's just really his ceiling is going to come down to how well he is able to manage his weight.
Now, you mentioned that he didn't really play like over 40% of snaps in any of the games. And I was hearing things where people are saying, he's actually doing better this season with better conditioning. And I'm looking, he's playing like less than half a game. Is this a guy who, had this problem? Like, is this a guy his problem is improving? Is there something he put together to try and fix this problem? Or is like you said, this is something he's going to have to deal with? Is this a thing that could scuttle his career?
Yeah, so it's definitely something that he improved upon from going from his junior year to his senior year. I think he definitely made a more noticeable impact this season than perhaps he had in the past, and was I think a more disruptive defender. And if you really want to look at what I think were his two best games, the Clemson game at the beginning of the season and the Alabama game at the end of the year, and you can probably include the Michigan game there as well, he had lengthy breaks there between those games that sort of allowed him to come in top physical shape. He mentioned before the national championship game, he was going on a run to do some conditioning, 2 days before that national title game. We don't hear that a whole lot. Whereas I think you go back and watch the Alabama SEC championship game, which was, Georgia's, I think, 6th game in 6 weeks, something that's going to happen every NFL season. He was not in the best shape in that game, and the tape really showed that. And so I think with no school, with some of the, fewer distractions at the NFL level where you're truly able to focus on football every single week, I do think that there's the potential for him to keep this in check. But, as I've sort of said, his NFL ceiling, could he be a Vita Vea? I certainly think that's the type of person he could be, in terms of being a run stuffer, in terms of just clogging up space there. I know Cam Hayward is a guy that some people have thrown out. He's mentioned himself, John Henderson, as a sort of, pro comp there. If he's going to be those types of players, he's just got to simply stay on the field and make sure that he's playing at around 340 pounds.
So really interesting takeaway for me here is how athletic he was at the Combine, yet struggled condition-wise. Is this, I guess, how did these two things even work out? Was he less athletic during the season, or is he just an athletic specimen that gets gassed really easy?
I think he's an athletic specimen that gets gassed really easy. And, I don't put too much stock in this, but he did only run the 40 once. And so you wonder if he had run it again, where would he have come in on that? Would it have been, so drastically different than what he had? Obviously, 4.78 is a fantastic time, but I think if he did want to ease some of those concerns there, maybe you do some of those athletic drills, the ones where you're running quite often more than once there to sort of alleviate some of the concerns.
Now, if you had to pick, right, for predicting the future, do you think Jordan Davis is a guy who puts it together and becomes an all-pro at the NFL level? Or is this a guy we look at down the road and say, man, if he had played in like the 80s or 90s, right, like in the 1980s, 1990s, he would have been like the superstar of the league then, but he just doesn't fit the game today?
It's so tough to sort of know and understand, how he's going to be viewed when I don't think he's going to be an impact pass rusher consistently enough. Now, I think he's going to be a very good player and do his role very well. Snacks Harrison is a guy that sort of comes to mind, a dominant run defender, but a guy who league-wide doesn't necessarily have the acclaim because he doesn't necessarily always rush the passer well. I do think he's going to be a successful professional football player in covering him and getting to know his story. He has incredible both off-the-field character and football character. He's going to be a good teammate. He's going to do all the sort of little things you want to see him do to become a successful football player. But in terms of, Pro Bowl or All-Pro, I probably lean no, just given I didn't consistently – we heard year after year, starting in his sophomore year, this is a guy who, wow, he's got a really high ceiling, and he just never seemed to really get there from a pass rushing standpoint. And you look at NFL defensive linemen, what makes TJ Watt, what makes Aaron Donald, what makes even, JJ Watt, so to speak, such great defensive linemen. It's not only what they're able to do against the run, but the reason they're household names is because of the sack totals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're not wrong there. I feel like personally, Jordan Davis is either like your Brian Bosworth or your Aaron Donald, just like an absolute freak or someone that like might fall off the map. So it'll be interesting to say that the least to follow his career as things go on here. But next guy I want to bring up is Nico Dean, another stud, centerpiece of that defense for the Georgia Bulldogs. Can you talk about his game and what kind of makes him special?
I got to watch, the Georgia football defense up close last year. I think many consider it one of the best college football defenses of the past, decade or so. If you watch just five random plays from the Georgia defense, that's about how long it should take you to realize, on a defense full of studs, Trayvon Walker, who I think might be a top 10 pick, Devonte Wyatt, who's worked himself into a first rounder. On that loaded defense last year, Nico Dean was far and away the best player. I just, some of the things that you see him do, the ground that he covers, he is a standout player in pass coverage, and that really tracks back to even his freshman year. His instincts are off the charts. Obviously, you want bigger linebackers. I know the New England Patriots, they're looking for sort of monsters there in the middle. Only weighs in at, 5'11", 31-inch arms. He's not physically going to wow you. Standing next to him in interviews, I'm like, you're roughly pretty close to my size, but with his football intelligence, one of the things he came into Georgia with the comparison to Roquan Smith, saying, he's going to be the next Roquan Smith. I actually think he had a better college career than Roquan Smith did. And I think that speaks to just the person he is off the field. This is a kid who could have gone to Stanford coming out of high school. And I think he has put it all together. And I think he's going to be a guy who maybe he falls a little bit on draft day because of those size concerns, but he is going to be an absolute stud from day one.
Now, we've seen a lot of linebackers come out of college recently that have been top-level athletes, smarter guys, the middle linebacker type that you want to keep linemen off of them. And Nico Dean is in that category. How does he compare to guys like a Devin Bush, Devin White, Tremaine Edmonds? A decent number of these guys who have come out, and they've kind of been good, but they haven't really become breakout names in the NFL like maybe a Bobby Wagner or a Luke Kuechly were.
Right. I'd even include, say, a Roquan Smith in there, good players, but for whatever reason, they haven't necessarily turned into the difference maker, the off-ball linebacker. I would even say, those guys are a step down from, say, a Darius Leonard or a Fred Warner for the San Francisco 49ers. And I think with Nicobe, what really to me stands out more is I do think he's going to be able to make an impact in coverage and his ability to cover both tight ends who are a good bit bigger than him and then also running backs coming out of the backfield. I do think he's a plus player in pass coverage, along with being a plus blitzer. I think he's someone who really showed this year at Georgia. He was effective at getting after the pass rusher, whether it coming off of the blitz or a delayed stunt. And I do think that is going to translate and really his success as a third down player, I think in terms of third down stops, which you either, measured as incompletions or tackles short of the first down marker, he was one of the top players in college football in that statistic. And I think going forward, that's something that can allow his game to transfer to the NFL and will, I think, maybe allow him to be closer to, say, the Fred Warner, Darius Leonard types than, say, the Roquan Smith or Devin Bush types of the world.
Now, it would be easy to continue chatting on Nico Dean, but there's so many prospects from Georgia. Let's just continue to roll on here. One of the names you mentioned earlier was Trayvon Walker, someone that you mentioned might work his way into being a top 10 pick even. I know he's listed as an edge rusher, and something Geoffrey and I kind of chatted about before. I think on the Steelers defense, make more sense if you'd be like that 3-4 defensive end type. Is he someone that could kick inside, or what's his kind of ideal scheme fit?
Absolutely. I actually think, in terms of upside, maybe as a 4-3 defensive end, that's, his preferred spot. But he played that 5 technique defensive end spot in a 3-4 defense at Georgia. And I do think that that's something he's shown he can do. When he was asked to do almost everything at Georgia, which is kind of stunning from a defensive end position. Set the edge on the outside on first and second down, bump inside to be sort of a 3-2-eye technique, pass rusher on third down situations. He is so, seeing him in person, he is so incredibly long and so incredibly well built. Easily the best athlete, I think, on this Georgia team last year. He had a tip pass that went for an interception in the Florida game where he's legitimately 10, 15 yards in coverage down the field. He can do just about everything. I don't know how many 270-pound defensive linemen have played on kickoff teams before, but he was doing that at Georgia as a freshman. And so I think, really his game is upside. Only 6 sacks this past season at Georgia, but they asked him to do so much. I think when you get him into an NFL scheme and you simplify his game a little bit, I think it's really going to potentially allow him to take off and be a really productive player. And while some might see him as that 4-3 edge rusher to sort of allow him to be, an upper tier player, I think he can go in and be a 5 technique, 3-4 defensive end and be a really productive player because that's what he was asked to do at Georgia. And they asked a lot of him, maybe more than anyone on that defense.
Okay. Real quick. Has he played in coverage? Does Georgia ever drop him?
From time to time, yes, but not consistently enough.
Okay. All right. So following up on that, the Steelers had Melvin Ingram. And when they first got him, they used him where he played edge, but he would also shift inside like the Broncos used him, Chargers used him before then. Is that a role you could see Trayvon Walker working into where he could play an outside linebacker where you could move inside and like you said, play that 5-tech spot and kind of on passing situations where you go a 4-man front. Obviously, he's your defensive end. Is he a guy who can play that kind of versatile role in the NFL once he gets into your defense and has some time?
I think so. He is that athletically gifted. 4'5", 140, 35-inch vertical jump. I mean, the guy is a creative player on Madden. If you were building a football player, you'd build a Trayvon Walker. And he showed that he was able to do a variety of things at Georgia. And if you have the patience to teach him and he's a willing learner, I think he is someone who could do a lot of different things for your defense. He's sort of, again, he's not as developed as, say, an Aiden Hutchinson is as an edge rusher right now, or even a Jermaine Johnson, another, former Georgia guy before finishing up at Florida State. But I do think he's a guy who has shown enough that he can do just about anything you ask him to on the football field.
Now, continuing to move along the defensive line, Devonte Wyatt, so many studs along that Georgia front. Can you compare him to the other guys and what makes him a talent to head into this league?
Yeah, Michael, I think you brought up Aaron Donald earlier, and you never want to compare someone to maybe the best football player of the past decade, but that's what his game is. What Aaron Donald does well, that is what Devonte Wyatt does well. And they didn't always ask him to, be that Aaron Donald type, especially on an every down basis because they rotate so heavily on the defensive line. But he's a guy who, even in games where, the Georgia defense didn't play well, he showed that he was able to win one-on-one matchups, get to the quarterback, shoot the gap, be that sort of ideal 3 technique, disruptive player there in the middle. And I think as more people have studied his game and he's shown that he can test well athletically, he's a guy that can do, exactly that, be a disruptive player from the middle of that defense, be a guy that if you ask him to can create pressure, get after the quarterback, disrupt running plays, and really be a very effective player. He's a very different defensive tackle than, say, Jordan Davis, who's much more of a space eater. But in terms of that disruptive playmaker in the middle of the defensive line, I think Devonte Wyatt fits that to a T. I think that's a big reason why you've seen him shoot up draft boards this offseason where, after the season ended, some saw him maybe as a 2nd or 3rd round pick, whereas I believe today Todd McShay had him as a top 15 overall pick in his mock draft.
Moving on again. You mentioned him, Jermaine Johnson. Transfers to Florida State because he's part of a rotation at Georgia and kind of on the lower end of it. And now, like, he's ACC Defensive Player of the Year. And I'm seeing it in mock drafts in a lot of places have him ranked even or even ahead of Trayvon Walker. What happened there? Is this a guy who just fit better in the ACC and just wasn't as good on Georgia? Or did he really, like, show something there that he didn't show at Georgia?
So I'll actually, like, when he got a chance to play in 2020, he played really well, and he was a noticeable player on the Georgia defense. But the Georgia outside linebackers position in the last 2 years have been really loaded. Azeez Ojulari came in, had, I think, 8 sacks for the New York Giants this past year. He was eating into Jermaine's snap count. Adam Anderson, a guy who before he got in some legal trouble and was accused of rape. A guy who has the athletic ability to possibly be a first-round pick. Nolan Smith was a 5-star recruit in a guy we're going to be talking about a year from now, I think. They were so loaded at the outside linebacker position. They were trying to, keep as many guys happy. And Jermaine said, I want to be an every down player and show what I can do. And he came out and said this to his credit. That's the reason he's leaving Georgia. I want to show that I can be an every down player. And he went to Florida State and absolutely tore up that league. And he fits a lot of the boxes that Georgia's looking for and was a key contributor to that team in 2020. And I think he has shown over the process this past year, going to the Senior Bowl, playing really well there, that he's going to be a very, very good football player at the next level now that he has had the opportunity to do so.
Moving on to the next player, and excuse me if I pronounce it wrong. Louis Cine, safety. Cine. Damn, that's close. But is he more of a free or strong safety? Is he a deep third guy? Is he a guy that will come down in the run? How does he play that safety position?
So I'd probably say his future projects as a free safety, a center fielder type safety, a guy who incredible range, 6'2", ran a 4.37 40, I think. But he will come up and he will hit you in the mouth. I know there was a play in the Florida game last year where he got ejected for knocking out Kyle Pitts. It was real close to being a clean hit there. And he was easily, I think, the hardest hitter on this Georgia defense this past season. He's a guy who is a safety. I think in studying him and seeing him, you want to see more from him in terms of his deep coverage ability, his ability to break up a pass and say a one-on-one situation where he's the last line of defense. But he's absolutely going to knock you out in the run. He's a great run defender, has incredible sideline to sideline speed, and is able to make a difference in there. And I think for him as a safety, the only real knock on him that I have is that he's just not Kyle Hamilton. I think in a lot of years, Louis Cine would be the first safety off the board. But when you have a generational prospect like Kyle Hamilton, it sort of knocks Cine down a bit. But it would not surprise me in the slightest. And I've heard that he's interviewed very well. Doesn't surprise me at all. A very sharp guy. And I think he's a guy who is going to make an NFL team very happy, even if because of the safety position, he ends up going later than he probably should as a football player.
All right, to continue this rapid fire, another of the linebackers, Quay Walker. He's bigger. Is he more of a guy who can take on offensive linemen? Is he a guy who can stuff the run? And does he bring more versatility, or would he be better on a team where he could focus on that type of the game, that part of the game?
So everything we sort of mentioned about Nico Dean, I think Quay Walker is the opposite. 6'4", 250 pounds, runs really well there, incredibly long, doesn't quite diagnose plays as well as Nico Dean does. So if you're putting him in a system where he's not having to think quite as much as he's just see ball, get ball, I think that would allow him to shine really well. I think he's probably better as a, first and second down linebacker. I'll be interested to see how he develops as a third down linebacker, but and I'm sure we're going to touch on Channing Tindall as well, potentially. They were so loaded at linebacker and really that entire front seven, they rotated a lot. So, when it comes to draft stuff, just because you don't see someone do something doesn't mean they can't do something. And I think Quay Walker with his length, his size, you've seen the success that, say, a Fred Warner, a Darius Leonard, I know I mentioned them earlier, they check those length boxes. Quay Walker fits that to a T. And so if you think that he's able to drop back in coverage and make the right reads, he's a guy that I think can continue to reach his ceiling, and his best football might be ahead of him.
Now, just to do a little rapid fire to make sure we can check off some of these boxes, and might have to steal a couple more minutes of your time if it's okay. But I want to touch on receiver George Pickens. What kind of style receiver is he? Is he a big body, small body, athletic, sure-handed? Can you break down George Pickens?
Yeah, so I'll use a Pittsburgh Steeler guy. I think he's a little bit like, he's probably not as quite versatile in terms of, handing the ball off to him as Chase Claypool. But in terms of being a physical downfield guy, a guy who you just throw up a 50-50 ball to him and he uses his size and his speed, I mean, I know he only jumped 33 inches on the vertical jump, but watching him play, there was no ball that he cannot go up and get. And I think, obviously he has the ACL injury a year ago. The fact that he came out and ran a 4.47 surprised a lot of people at Georgia, just given, they did not think that he was going to run that fast, not even a full year after his knee injury. He is a guy who a year ago we all considered a first-round lock. And for him to come back in the end of the season, play the SEC championship game, play the national championship game, when he had a legitimate NFL future to worry about, I think says a lot about him and the player that he's going to be. And I mentioned earlier, Jordan Davis being able to focus on just football and not have to worry about the school aspects of it. I think with George, you're really going to see him blossom, and I absolutely believe his best football is ahead of him. I can't say he's better than Chris Olave or say Garrett Wilson, but it wouldn't surprise me if a year or 2 years from now, we're talking about George Pickens as one of the best wide receivers from this class.
Okay, on Georgia's offensive line, they have two guards out,
yep.
Saylor and Schaefer.
Yep.
Can you tell us what kind of game there are and what kind of schemes they fit? Are they going to be more a power, like run blockers? Are they zone blockers? Like what kind of schemes are they going to fit? Where are they going to excel?
Yeah, so I think Jamari Sawyer is probably more of your man up, straight runaway, man on man, big on big run blocker. He's a guy who played a lot at left tackle for Georgia, but I think he knows, and I think just about everybody following him knows, is going to be a guard at the next level, is able to move, good athlete, but not necessarily a great one. I think Justin Schaefer is much more of your zone blocking scheme guy, a guy whose athleticism is good, but he doesn't necessarily have the great strength that, say, a Sawyer does, that, say, a year ago, a Ben Cleveland from Georgia had. But I think both those guys have showed that they can be effective players. And I'll say this about Sawyer. I don't know if that I've met, a more mature, well-thinking, player, a guy that I absolutely is going to be successful at the NFL level than, say, Jamari Sawyer. And because of the versatility that he showed at Georgia, if you need him to play left tackle in a pinch, I think he's good enough to do that. But he is a guy who can play along the offensive line. And I think that's going to help make him a very successful NFL football player.
Now, just a few more prospects here before we can let you on your way, Connor. Channing Tindall, you brought his name up a little bit earlier. How did he fit in Georgia's linebacker rotation? And if you had to rank these guys, of course, Dean would be at the top. But how would you rank all these linebackers?
Yeah, so personally speaking, I'd probably go Dean 1, Tindall 2, Walker 3. Tindall weirdly never started, but he every time he got on the field, even going back sophomore and junior year, guy just made plays. I think has great sideline to sideline ability. You go back and watch the Clemson game. It's kind of stunning to just see how quickly he closes on players. I also think he brings the ability to, in certain situations, if you want to move him around and have him come off the edge as a pass rusher, I think he can do that there as well. And I think he's a guy who, personally speaking, I think is a little bit more scheme versatile than, say, a Quay Walker is. And I think, because he was playing behind a talented guy in Walker and a talented guy in Dean, didn't necessarily get his shine. But I think he, because of his length, because of his speed, is going to be able to do a lot of different things at the next level.
All right, Darion Kendrick, cornerback. He's been called more of a project. Do you think he's going to take a few years to get going? And where would you play him in the defense?
Yeah, so he's obviously, I think, an outside cornerback. I think maybe teams might try him in the nickel position, but I'm not quite sure he's fast enough. He's definitely got the mentality to hang up on the outside, but I think if you go back and watch his games at Clemson, Clemson, the 2019 National Championship game against LSU, Jamar Chase just put on a clinic against him. And then that next year, Garrett Wilson just absolutely roasted him. I do think he struggles a little bit more with some of the speed defenders, or speed wide receivers rather, but I do think he's a physical player. He's got a good eye for the football, 4 interceptions this past year at Georgia. And if you're not asking him to defend the, say, fastest player, one of the faster players on the defense, I do think he's got the length and size and ball skills to really hold up and be a productive NFL cornerback. He's not going to be, a number one lockdown guy. I don't think he's going to be an Eric Stokes type out of Georgia last season, but I do think he's a guy who he's played a ton of football. He's played in winning locker rooms before. He knows what it takes. I think he grew a lot this past year at Georgia after getting dismissed from Clemson. And I do think he's a guy that in the right situation can help a winning team continue to win.
Okay, one last player for you, I think, here. James Cook, younger brother, of Dalvin Cook of the Minnesota Vikings, of course. Does he compare to his big brother at all? And where do you kind of foresee him ending up in the NFL? And would he be more of a role running back, or is he someone that could carry the load?
So I'd say be careful in comparing him to his brother, just because I don't think he has the every down durability at the next level to be able to do so. I actually kind of think his game might be a little bit more similar to, say, an Alvin Kamara, a guy who has the speed, an incredible pass catcher, a guy who, if you get him in a linebacker, and Georgia did this multiple times against big name opponents like Alabama and Michigan, if you have him on a linebacker, that's an easy 50-yard play for Georgia. I think he has shown incredible speed, great pass catching. He's actually probably a little bit better running between the tackles than maybe he got credit for in his time at Georgia. And I think he's a guy who, you may never ask him to carry the load, say like Christian McCaffrey does for the Carolina Panthers, but a guy who, if he goes to the right offensive coordinator who's committed to using him in correct ways, I think he can be a really big difference maker at the next level.
If I can jump in with one last question.
Yep.
Put on your prediction hat. Does Georgia get 6 players in the first round?
No. I think they're going to get 4. I think it's going to be Trayvon Walker first, Devonte Wyatt second, Jordan Davis third, Nico Dean fourth. I think maybe the 5th could be Lewis Cine there, sneaking in at the end of the first round. But I think they're going to get 4 players in that first round. But it would not surprise me if they get 5 potentially. And I think you could see 8 guys from this team, maybe even 9 off in the first 2 rounds.
Great stuff. Connor, before we let you go, is there anything you want to plug for the people?
Yeah, you guys can follow me online at Twitter at KConnorRiley, CONNOR for how you spell Connor there. We've got a ton of stuff on the draft coming up. It was a banner weekend this past weekend for Georgia. They've got the pro day next week, and I expect it to be a very big NFL draft for the University of Georgia. So we will have tons of content on there, and I'm sure a Pittsburgh Steeler will come from the University of Georgia.
Well, the right things are going. About half the teams in the draft will end up with the Georgia Bulldogs. So
Yeah.
I've 50-50 shot, flip a coin. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. But Connor, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thanks, guys.
We'll see you later. If the Steelers do, in fact, draft a Georgia Bulldog, might have to bring him back on, Mr. Benedict. But, the first thing that kind of pops to my mind there, and one of the last players we talked about, was James Cook. The Steelers could use a running back number 2. They really, really could. Will they go chase one? Remains to be seen. But I feel like that would be the perfect yin to Najee Harris's yang. By the way, happy birthday, Najee Harris. Turns 24 today. Time of the recording, of course, March 9th. But Geoffrey, do you think the Steelers need to chase that RB2? And would Cook be a good option?
I think he's the type. I think he's a good show of the type of player. I think there's several other options that match that in this draft class. So he could definitely end up being a Pittsburgh Steeler, and I don't think that would be a bad move for the Steelers at all. And I do agree they need that kind of a player. Someone Najee can. He's great on screens, and that's a great balance to his running game. And he can line up and run like a little slant and stuff. But it'd be nice to have someone who is a big play threat as a receiver out of the backfield and can go out and be like a legitimate runner out there. Even a guy you could put a 2-back system in where you put him in like kind of the slot wing back position, let him run some interesting routes and run some interesting run plays, stuff like that. Get creative with it. We definitely use a guy like that.
All right. This comes in from Sean Manahan. Puts $5 in the tip jar. Excuse me. Oh, there's 2. As you fix the picture frame there, we saw that in the live chat, driving people nuts. But anyway, Sean Manahan, $5 in the tip jar. Wishing Najee Harris a happy birthday. And yes, we absolutely need a good RB2. Couldn't agree more. But the things you need to do first is fix your offensive line. And rumors from ESPN, seems like the Pittsburgh Steelers are very much interested in doing just that. And man, it warms my heart. They were listed as players for Ryan Jensen, for Laken Tomlinson, who I know you love. Austin Corbett was also included in that article. A number of players. What the heck? The Pittsburgh Steelers are in on a ton of rumors. First of all, how do you feel about them actually targeting offensive linemen? Because I know a week ago we were talking about like, oh man, I feel like they're not actually going to chase anyone here. Now it seems like they are. So crisis averted for now. I can sleep at night for now.
We're down to DEFCON 3 now on the offensive line.
So they're chasing offensive linemen. That's great. Past that, however, they're involved in a lot of rumors. This is new territory. So if you could speak on both those things, I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, I think mostly it's the Steelers have options, and like they do with the draft every year. Like you hear Mike Tomlin loves 87 players in every combine class. He's talking to all these people. Everybody loves Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin loves everybody. And as everyone's like, oh, the Steelers want to draft like these 20 players in the first round. Well, that's because they're doing their due diligence. They're finding out about everybody. just because they're talking about somebody, just because they're looking into what it would cost to acquire them, if that player's interested, what kind of, interest there is on the agent side, on the team side, all the different aspects of it, doesn't mean that's their play, right? That doesn't mean like Steelers are throwing all their eggs into this basket and this is the guy they really, really want. It just means, no, they're checking on literally everyone. And the way Mike Tomlin does that, when Mike Tomlin liked Lamar Jackson, it was like bromance kind of thing. Him and Aaron Rodgers, that's how Mike Tomlin does it. Mike Tomlin comes out very real and friendly, and everyone loves him, right? All the players like Mike Tomlin. So I can see why people would be like, whoa, Mike Tomlin really likes this guy. They're really after him, all this stuff. But we're only drafting one player in the first round, right? We're only drafting so many players, and we're going to sign a few free agents. The number of free agents the Steelers are linked to, like, you could build a whole team. You could do the Pittsburgh Steelers free agent offseason list and then make a full team of players. Like, it's that many people. So I think it's mostly them doing due diligence, and some of these players may end up being Steelers, but it may be one. Like, we may have 20 names and it ends up one of them gets signed, or that doesn't even work out and we get none of them. I wanted to, on the offensive line, I wanted to throw something to you, Michael. I got asked this by someone on Twitter, right? They asked, what about signing a guy like a Nick Martin? Was a center, was a starter for Houston, was pretty good, and then was signed to be a backup for the Raiders, played 6 total snaps all season as the interior of their line stayed healthy, right? You sign a guy like that to compete with Kendrick Green, to be your starter and be good enough, like lower tier of the NFL starting centers. But that leaves you open to draft a Tyler Linderbaum. That leaves you open to address a right guard or a right tackle or something like that. How would you view that move? Because that, to me, smells like a Steelers-style move. Bring in someone to compete with Kendrick Green. Don't give up on him. Give Kendrick Green still a chance. But bring in someone with starter experience who could be like the Doug Legursky of the, or like the, like the weak link on the offense at center, but can play the position and do the actual job.
Oh, this is tough. Honestly, I probably wouldn't like the move unless the Steelers somehow, by grace of God, had Tyler Linderbaum fall in their lap and they make the move. To me, the level of center play is nowhere near what it needs to be. Like,
yeah,
Mason Rudolph already is his biggest issue is pocket awareness and having your center getting dumped on your lap after he rockets a snap 20 feet over your head. That's not good. Like, that is the difference of the Steelers probably losing more than half their games at minimum next year, if that's the case. I am not less than average shouldn't be what you strive for at offensive line play. I wouldn't want to waste $1 million. I know it in salary cap terms, it means almost nothing, but to me, that still isn't good enough. If they can't get a Jensen, that's fine. Then you go after a Ben Jones. If you can't do that, like, to me, the perfect situation is you find someone that is capable of playing guard. And if that center that we all love falls in your lap, you take him, you flip that center, you play him at guard, go play football. It's great. That is the perfect situation. Is that going to happen? Probably not. If the Steelers could land a Ryan Jensen and Laken Tomlinson, okay, now all of a sudden you don't have to worry about using your first-round pick on the offensive line. Things are different now. Now you can go play football, and you can go out and get the best player available on the board. You can go get your Nico Dean or whoever, So for me, I want the Steelers. They don't necessarily have to be the big game hunters of free agency. I just want them to find better than average for their offensive line. Because that means Najee Harris is going to be better. That means Mason Rudolph will have more of a chance. And that's all we can really wish for, is to give these guys a chance and see what they can do in the scheme, which I don't know if we've seen that yet from these guys. Now, kind of continuing, mentioning quarterbacks, it's been a bit of an interesting week, I think you could say, for the quarterback position. Things kind of got shook up a little bit. Aaron Rodgers staying in Green Bay. Does he have a contract? Does he not? It doesn't seem like anyone knows, but regardless, he'll be a Packer in 2022. Russell Wilson gets traded to the Denver Broncos. That changes things a little bit. Sure, doesn't it? But all these moves, does this worry you about what the Pittsburgh Steelers do? Of course, I'm forgetting the biggest one of all, Carson Wentz getting dealt to the Washington Commanders. But this quarterback market is moving fast. All of a sudden, the Colts are looking for a quarterback, and so are the Seahawks. Just because teams acquired a quarterback doesn't mean the original team is A-okay at their own QB position. So what does this mean for the Steelers? Other teams are making moves. The Steelers are sitting on their hands.
I think we're seeing teams that are kind of in that middle part of the first round saying we can get a quarterback in the draft. We can get a quarterback other ways. Whereas you're seeing like some teams that are a little higher up in the draft, a little worse situation, being like, you know what, we're not going to gamble on getting a starter in this draft. We're going to go get one. I think it speaks a lot to the quarterback talent we're seeing in this class, where you've got some good starters, you've got some guys that can play in the NFL, but they might not be worth a top 10 pick, right? They're not those guys. So you don't, and they're not the most, you're not going to have the most confidence that they're going to come in and really turn your program around. So it's interesting to me. It's weird to me because Seattle, at the same time, you know, we're hearing they're in on other quarterbacks, and it's like you're unloading talent. Like you ditch Bobby Wagner, you ditch Russell Wilson for a bunch of draft picks. Like sounds like you're in for a rebuild, and then they're talking about getting veterans. I don't know where all of these things stand, but what I think we're going to see is this quarterback, like you said, the quarterback movement is kind of crazy. This is a league that is quarterback crazy right now. This NFL draft, quarterbacks are going to get overdrafted. That the free agent quarterbacks are going to be overvalued. The trades, all this stuff. To me, that smells like a year the Steelers sit out and say, you know what, we're not gonna overcommit. We're not gonna overdraft. We're not gonna be stupid. We're not gonna be stupid just to get a quarterback just because, you know, we need one. So therefore, we have to go get one. This is why you have a Mason Rudolph. This is why you have that guy. So you can sit there and say, you know what? No, we're going to go into 2022 with Mason Rudolph as a quarterback and see how it goes. And we'll pick up players who fall. We'll pick up a Tyler Linderbaum. We'll pick up, a Jordan Davis. We'll pick up Quay Walker. We'll pick up someone who falls that shouldn't be there because of that.
Perfect move.
And speaking of that, with the draft, like everything we're seeing with the draft right now and the kind of movement we're seeing in mock drafts and everything, I think we are seeing signs that this draft class, we're going to see an NFL draft that shocks a lot of people. We're going to see players picked in positions that no one expects them to be picked at. Mm-hmm. Oh, this guy's around too early. That guy fell really far. Because we're all reacting. We're all reacting to the combine. We're all jumping around, doing all this stuff. NFL teams, most of them aren't. Most of them already know where their guys are. I think a great name on this is a guy we talked about from Georgia, George Pickens. One of the better deep threats in this draft class while you're playing football, right? When it's an actual football game, George Pickens is one of the better deep threats in this class. When we get to the combine and you're in shorts and you're running 40 yards in a straight line, he ran a 4.47. Oh my goodness. Can he run past someone? Can he get open? I don't know. Everyone else is running 4.3s, you know. He's slow. Now he's all of a sudden, is he a possession guy, right? Well, one of the things I made a Twitter post on this, but like if you look at the top 10 players for total yards gained this season on downfield passes, right? 15 yards past the line of scrimmage or more. There's 2 players with a sub 4.4. There's 3 players over 4.5, right? And most of them are in the 4.4 range. And there's not a single player over 6'1" running a sub 4.4 on that list. And we've got all these guys that are like, oh, look at how fast he is. He's tall, he's fast, and he's going to be unstoppable. Is he? Are they going to work out? To me, there's signs that a guy like a George Pickens could fall. There are some players who are going to fall because people are going to look at numbers that aren't as important, and they're going to overdraft players. And there's going to be good players who fall. Just like this year, everyone's paying attention to quarterbacks. Some good players are going to fall through the cracks. And the Steelers that's where the Steelers are going to make their money this year. And that's what I'm looking for, is where the Steelers get value against the mock draft world, against the movement, against the combine, everything like that. When they go counter to the flow of overreaction, what do they end up with? And I think this could be a very good year for that.
Yeah, really. This is a draft class as well that I think is weaker than what we've seen in recent years. And I think the ideal situation is you take the player that wasn't supposed to make it to 20. You just take the best players you possibly can. And you mentioned the Steelers sitting back and being out of the quarterback thing. I kind of expect it, really. The news from Steelers insider Jerry Jerbear Dulac reporting the Steelers are completely out on Deshaun Watson, especially with all his legal stuff. I'm not surprised by that. That just won't happen. Mitch Trubisky, the rumor there is he's going to get a massive offer from the New York Giants to compete with Daniel Jones. I don't want to get in a bidding war over Mitch Trubisky. That seems ridiculous. Jameis Winston has he had some love from the Washington Commanders and some more love to stay in New Orleans. So I could see that happening. Teddy Bridgewater, I don't know. Is that who you want to spend a bunch of money on? To me, the answer is heck no. Marcus Mariota, I think he made like $10 million last season. Is that what you want to chase? The answer is still no for me. Like that's too much money for these guys to not give you too much more than what Mason Rudolph is going to give you. And like that's kind of just the fact of the matter right now. But
I'm gonna real quick jump in there with two names that I keep bringing up that I
Jacoby
think
Brissett.
The Steelers, Jacoby Brissett and Tyrod Taylor, they're going to be cheap. They're going to be cheap compared to these other guys who are going to get in bidding wars. Like Mitchell Trubisky bidding war, come on.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? If he gets $8 million, what's wrong with you? What are you doing, right? And you could get a guy who, in a Matt Canada system, could give you good enough results for way cheaper without nearly the long-term investment. A guy that you can bring in for a year and then get someone better. Or bring him in for 2 years and draft your guy next year and have that veteran who knows the system be there and teach him, who's not actually in this thinking they're going to be a long-term starter. That's where I think the Steelers go with this. And it's still holding up with all this crazy quarterback movement. That's kind of your options. That's kind of the good options.
Now, before we run out of time here, there were one quarterback that was linked to the Steelers from Jason La Canfora today, and another that is also believed to still potentially be on the trade market. First of all, being Jimmy Garoppolo, actually having his name tied to the Steelers, that and the Indianapolis Colts seem to be the two teams that are snooping around on Jimmy G. The other available quarterback is Kirk Cousins. I think those are two names that probably don't get Steeler fans excited. Wouldn't get me too excited either, unless the cost of acquisition was nothing and the teams held most of their money. But what are your thoughts on either of those two names? And since there's been so much quarterback movement, do you expect a move to be made there within the next week before free agency?
I don't want a Kirk Cousins. We are not that offense. We're not built to be that offense that he thrives in. And I'm still out on Jimmy G. Like, we want to run a similar offense to what Jimmy G was running, but that San Francisco offense is an absolute machine. They had an offensive line. They had the best tight end in football. They had multiple good running backs. They had one of the best minds for that scheme in the game. I like Matt Canada, but the best offensive coordinators for any scheme end up head coaches, and that's what they have in San Fran. So that offense is like a juggernaut. You got Deebo Samuel. Yeah, like 10 yards per reception of yards after the catch. 10. They made average 10 yards after he caught the football. That's how a quarterback looks good. That's how Jimmy G looks good, is he's in a system that just asks him to make simple plays. You don't have to be good. I don't want Jimmy Garoppolo because I don't think you're going to get what San Francisco got from him, because it was the perfect system for him, and we're going to be running a less good version of it. And he wasn't good enough to get them over the hump, right? He's not good enough to put them all the way up. I'm not buying him.
So we are full steam ahead here, almost at the legal tampering window, where a lot of deals are figured out. A bunch of teams are signing their own players. We're almost at free agency itself. It is on our doorstep, and things are about to get nuts. The Steelers haven't made a single move yet this offseason. They haven't re-signed anyone. They didn't offer franchise tag to anyone. They haven't done nothing. They have not done a thing. What is the first move these Pittsburgh Steelers make? I do believe we talked about it last week when you posed a question to me, but now, as we sit here, the quarterback market's already red hot. Do the Steelers get into that? Do they re-sign one of their own? Do they get linked with some crazy tightness to a free agent? What's the first move you actually see here?
The move I think ends up being their first move, and you're not going to like this, is I think it's a Okorafor. I think it's Chukwuma Okorafor is re-signed. I think that's their opening move. Because again, he's your swing tackle, right? In an ideal world, he's a swing tackle, but he's also a guy who has now a couple seasons of starter experience, right? So he's good, but he's not. I don't think he's going to be high on the free agent market. Some people seem to think he's going to get real money, but he's been a part of one of. He's for 2 seasons. He's been one of the starters on like one of the worst lines in football, and hasn't stood out as good. Unless you're looking at him solely off, games where he gets matched up with Myles Garrett. I don't know what you're looking at with him that's going to put him up in a high price. I think he's a deal that makes sense. Chukwuma Okorafor is a guy you can sign to a reasonable contract and still upgrade the position with someone else if the opportunity comes. But again, he's a guy the Steelers can live with. And I think one of the moves the Steelers will make is keep some guys who have been in here, had some continuity, but also they like to go into the draft with every position filled with someone they can live with as a starter. And then they go into the draft and you can upgrade it. So I think Chukwuma Okorafor makes a lot of sense from the Steelers' mindset.
I wouldn't react as much as if I wouldn't believe it, but it would be kind of Steelers-like. Man, I would hate that move, though. I would absolutely just be mad. Like, I guess the perfect move in my eyes is they actually release Zach Banner and Joe Schobert, which they haven't done yet, and we're very close to free agency, so what the heck's going on there? Tons of linebackers are available. Didn't even touch on the Tremaine Edmonds possible deal with the Steelers potentially being a thing, but Jermaine Edmonds has taken a lot of steps back from his freshman and sophomore season in the league. But nonetheless, oh man, if the Steelers signed Chukwuma Okorafor for their first move, that would be a collective groan from Steelers Nation. Now, before we say bye to everyone, though, Geoffrey Benedict, what exactly do you want to plug for the people?
Okay, I'm sorry I'm going to make us go over by a little bit here, but you mentioned Zach Banner. You wanted to cut Zach Banner. Zach Banner, my opinion, but I believe this very firmly. Zach Banner is not going to be cut before camp. His contract may be big, but they don't pay him a cent until week 1. When Kevin Colbert says they want to see more from him, that doesn't mean he's their starter next season. That doesn't mean he's necessarily on the roster. What tells me with that is he's going to be there when training camp starts. He's going to be there through training camp. He may be there for the preseason. He's going to be around. They're going to give him a chance to get back and see if he's that player. But I'm not willing to say he's on the team week 1, but I definitely think he makes it to training camp as a Pittsburgh Steeler. That's my thoughts on him. As for what I want to plug tomorrow, our Vertex, Dave Schofield and I have been covering the players who are free agents for the Steelers. Tomorrow is Ray McLeod and what he brings as both a punt and kick returner. We get kind of really into the stats and numbers and details on him. If you want to see what kind of a punt returner and kick returner he is, what value he brings there, as well as what he brings as a receiver. So check that out tomorrow. That will be running.
Now, I've also heard a rumor on Ray McLeod that there's a lot of potential suitors out there that are interested by his abilities as a special teamer and a depth receiver. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens with old.
That's one more player you don't get in a bidding war for. You don't get in a bidding war for Ray McLeod.
Absolutely freaking not. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the end of our show today. I need to remind each and every one of you to click over to BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Should be your one-stop shop for all things Pittsburgh Steelers. On top of that, if you're only watching on YouTube and Facebook, you're still only getting about a third of the story wherever you get your podcast from traditionally, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, you name it, whatever, what have you. Wherever you listen to those, just search Behind the Steel Curtain or just Behind the Steel Curtain, and you will get the entire family of BTSC podcasts at the tips of your fingers. So on behalf of my co-host, Geoffrey Benedict, my name is Michael Beck. You've been watching The Curtain Call, and we'll see you guys next week.